Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. And if this is your first time here, this is a podcast about political commentary, protest music, and revolutionary thinking. My name is 4AS, and this is my co host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, Merry Christmas. It is the end of the year, and we've got an interesting topic today because today is all about Santa and his origins.
Yes, we're doing a Christmas special, aren't we, 4AS? Never thought we'd go there, but here we are.
Well,
Special occasion.
yeah, and right before we actually started, you were telling me all about the origins of Saint Nicholas,
Yeah,
because that was the
yeah.
thing. Like when I because I actually recently went to Prague, and they actually have a church there that's dedicated to Saint Nicholas.
Right,
But
right.
from what you were saying, this has almost gone full circle with what we've discussed here on the podcast. But
Yeah.
his origins are not that dissimilar, or at least the modern interpretation of, Santa dressing up in a big red suit and him gift giving and all of that interpretation. It's not far away from Karl Marx's time.
Yes, very contemporaneous. I think the origins of the modern um, Santa story find themselves in the early 19th century, so the very early 1800s in
Hmm.
Europe and North America, which are the birthplaces or the origins of modern industrial capitalism as we know it. So the Santa story is very much, I would say, linked to the story of modern capitalism, and so it is the mythology of our time, of the industrial capitalist era. So it's a very important tale. So it's not just a nice story for kids. I think it paints a very important picture, which is a social critique of our society. And so you can draw a lot, obviously, about the myths and the legends of the time. And then draw those comparisons and understand the culture better. Well, I think you can understand our capitalist world very pertinently by understanding the story and the origins, especially of the modern Santa. Like as we were discussing before, like the origins of um, Saint Nicholas
Hmm.
have their kind of roots in previous times and then previous economic modes, and they're very reminiscent, and they kind of represent those earlier times with different economic modes and different social orders and things like that. Like we were talking about earlier, like let's just take the absolute origin of
Okay.
Santa then. So
Hmm.
from the idea of Saint Nicholas, which came from a Greek, it was a place in Greece around the fourth century, I think, BC. So very early days of Christianity. And there was a gentleman, I believe they were a bishop, who was just very generous and saved three women apparently from being sold into prostitution by paying their dowries for them so they could get married. And then this bishop became a kind of a symbol of generosity. And so, in order to celebrate Saint Nicholas, then like people would give presents to children and shower kids with gifts in the
Right.
celebration of Saint Nicholas on his saint's day. And there was like
Hmm.
this interesting thing that happened with I think some the Italians. They wanted to kind of take credit for Saint Nicholas, let's say, so they stole his bones from the church in Greece and brought him over to Italy, where he became kind of
Hmm.
associated with continental or mainland Europe. Um, and the tradition of Saint Nicholas would go on with this association with Saint Nicholas being a symbol of generosity, and therefore on the eve of his saint day, people would give presents to children. So that's kind of the origin of that element of the Santa story.
That's very curious, and I'm sure the viewers are probably questioning at this stage if there's such a long history of Saint Nicholas being part of the Christmas story.
Mm.
Then is like where is there any sort of antagonism that happens between the focus being on Jesus and the focus being on Santa.
Well, that yeah, well, it's interesting you say that because like when you say the Christmas story, Santa's not associated with the Christmas story at this point. So Santa
Right.
is or Saint Nicholas is a saint in his own right and is celebrated for his own purposes. Like I said, he's a symbol of generosity, and so on his saint day he is
Right.
celebrated. I think his saint day does coincide with kind of the end of the year, so it's a similar time, for like a similar part of the year as Christians would be celebrating Christmas. Um,
Mm.
but it wasn't until I believe the Reformation happened. It was actually Martin Luther who was kind of instrumental. One of his kind of one of the things that he really wanted to see change of from like kind of Catholicism was removing the praise and the focus, let's call it, on the saints and like all of the celebrations that people had with all the different saint days and all of the
Mm.
various calendar events associated with saint celebrations. So he wanted to bring it back to more of just a focus on Jesus and Christ mainly. So I believe he removed Saint Nicholas's Saint Day, which was, like I said before, close
Oh.
to Christmas anyway, and made it on the same day as Christmas, and therefore transferred the nice part that everyone liked, which was the giving of gifts to kids, and made that associated with Christmas so it could be more focused on Christ. But people never really let go of Saint Nick and being all generous and stuff like that. So the two kind of merged together at that point. Saint Nick and Christmas became kind of associated with one another, and that generosity and gift giving to children specifically stayed there with Christmas. And that's
Look,
where it comes in.
look, and I like that symbolism because what I mean by that is like the whole point of the Reformation, right, was Martin Luther being like, "Oh well, the church, especially Catholicism at the time, there's a history of indulgence, and we're not
Yes, yes.
focusing on the right time." And really, I couldn't dream of a better segue because obviously, when you do think about Christmas, you obviously think about consumerism, and you do think of that sort of indulgence, if you will, because
Yeah, yeah.
really when you think of Santa in the modern day, he is the poster boy of capitalism. Like
Mm, mm.
don't get me wrong, like
Y-
obviously
yes.
you well like don't get me wrong, obviously when you are a kid, like Christmas is special because there's only really two times a year that you get presents, and that's
Mm,
obviously your birthday
yep.
and Christmas. And
Mm,
it is a wonderful time because you're obviously experiencing all these things that
mm,
are a special time or an indulgence. But then, very much when you are an adult and you do have the ability to um, have subsist in your life, and you can kind of buy the things that you would like. Though, to be completely honest, we're living in a cost of living crisis, so I would question whether that's actually happening right now. But
mm.
look, put that to the side. Provided that you're not living in a recession,
Yeah.
you can buy what you would like in the world, and it's just, I guess, a myth for you for consumerism and also the capitalist markets machine to go keep on spinning, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. Well, like gift giving is very strongly associated in a capitalist sense um, with obviously being good spenders, right? And like that's
Mm,
what makes the economy go round in a capitalist sense is people ensuring the circulation of money. So you got to make
mm,
sure the MCM formula is working, money, commodity, money again, and like there's nothing like instilling a culture of consumer spending in the populace and having that happen on a particular calendarized kind of an annual kind of turnover
yes.
each year. So there's a specific time of the year where people really splurge and they go all out and they let go of kind of any reservations that they have about being involved in the consumer cycle as well. So like before, when it was like really just about like kind of the generosity and the giving to children, there probably wasn't as much of an association with consumer spending I guess, as there would be today. People might have
Mm,
made their own things or passed things down, or provided or consumed goods in a different way in order to be generous, let's say. But like under a capitalist society, it really is about making the next purchase to be as quote unquote generous as you can. It's really
mm,
centered around the economy. You got to be pumping stuff into the economy to be making a gesture of goodwill, and being festive and all that sort of stuff. You got to go out, hit the shops. There's late night shopping. The malls are going crazy, and yeah, you got to be a good spender. So it's a perfect form of mythology, and legend for a capitalist society. And like that's why I wanted to talk about Santa specifically,
mm,
um, for this podcast, because I think it is very much a capitalist tale. Like capitalism, and like we talked about the Reformation before, and like if you look at like kind of the trajectory of liberal societies, so the secularization of the world, the separation between church and state, the beautiful thing about like what we were talking about before, where like kind of someone like Luther tried to push the stories together. You have Saint Nick and Christ coming together, and then them transposing the best parts on each other. So you have Christmas, this very important event in the Christian calendar. It's the birth of Christ the Savior. And then you have this other person that's like kind of generous, is a symbol of goodwill and hope and festivities and all that sort of stuff, and giving gifts away, especially to children, and you have that coming together, and it served its purpose at the time. But like now, with the separation of church, you don't have to have the religious connotation at all. Like I was actually going to say at the start of this, when you said Merry Christmas, I was going to say Merry Xmas, because it
mm.
really removes any of the religious connotation there.
Yeah.
And it's a good reference to Futurama, which is just the best show on earth, as we all know. And so you know, you can have a capitalist story that has really a religious background, but like, look at that picture there, and you guys will see the AI art soon. But there's no religious symbolism, really, or you need to understand the religious significance of the backstory of Santa to get involved in Christmas. I know a lot of people that aren't Christian or aren't even religious, or are another religion, like they're Muslim,
Mm,
or Hindu or something like that. They all celebrate Christmas. They love the idea of gift giving, and they know their kids get into it greatly,
yes.
and so they completely like this capitalist fairy tale has got nothing to do with the religion. It's like what you were talking about before. It's got to do with consuming,
Yes.
and that story helps perpetuate the main cultural and economic structure that the whole of society is based on, and that's a Marxist idea.
Yes.
It's a very, very Marxian understanding of how things work. With historical materialism, the way that society works is you have the economic basis, and
Mm,
the whole cultural superstructure is built on top of that. The judicial system, the
mm,
political system, the arts, the sciences, everything comes from the economic driving force, in this case being capitalism. So all
mm.
culture, therefore, is a reflection of capitalism. And the Santa story couldn't be any more of a perfect reflection of capitalism.
Well, yeah, I what I would like to focus on specifically is that, especially in the Santa story, you focus on. Well, I would like to focus on the idea of altruism as a shield,
Okay.
because when you start thinking, like, obviously, when you look surface level at the Santa story, oh, he's a great guy. He obviously checks his list twice. He goes around the world and in one night, and he gives all the presents to the children. Isn't he such a great guy? But the thing is, everything in the Santa story is obviously focused on him. But the toy shop, everything is focused on him, and in some interpretations also Mrs. Claus. But
Mm,
you never see any sort of praise heaped on the elves, I guess to a certain extent, the reindeers, like
Yep, they can get a
maybe more.
special mention. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess more specifically Rudolph compared to the other ones.
Yep.
But the thing though is that you have the figurehead, or at least the leader, or the capitalist, who's reaping all of the praise,
Mm.
and it's not all of the workers. Like, for example, you don't hear in the story like what is the share of the work that the elves get? Do they get paid in milking cookies? Like,
Yeah.
what sort of what sort of thing do they get out of I guess Santa being so generous? Like, I'm not saying that there's holes to the story that we have to focus on this, but I guess what I want to say is the shield of altruism kind of masks consumerism, or at least it masks the effort of what other people do
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
everyone's focusing on Santa.
Yes. Yes. And so, like, yeah, I would say that the altruistic side of like the Santa story shields a lot of what could be seen. Like, if you take it out of its, glamorous context, could only be described as like some type of capitalist nightmare, right? Like what you were basically describing before is you have like this rich, fat white man with a beard who's in charge of a factory in an isolated part of the world, so in the North Pole, where there is horrendous weather conditions, and they work in. He has like a factory full of these workers, let's call them, who are one ethnic kind of meld. They're all the same type of being. They're lesser than Santa by assumption, right? Because they
Hmm.
work underneath him. They seemingly work all year. You don't hear about them having any breaks or stops, or chance, I guess, for reprieve or respite. They're worked all year long. They're not paid for their work at all. They produce all of the value and all
Hmm.
of the goods. And what you're saying is they produce all of this stuff for one man, Santa, who gets to make claim on all the value and then take all of the praise and the recognition for all of their hard work. He distributes all of the wealth that they create
Yeah.
to all of the people out there who again lump him with praise, and he gets all of the honor, and all of the celebration out of the system. Yes, the elves get a few mentions here or there, like your usual working class will do, but it's tokenistic at best. And then you have like a class of kind of esteemed workers, usually like a warrior class, you could call them, potentially even a managerial class in a
Hmm.
capitalist setting, who kind of Santa relies on because of their skills or their physical prowess. You have the reindeer who are able to propel him around the world. Um, Magically, might I ask, because he's able to traverse the entire globe and hand out presents to all children, within one evening as he speeds around the world, at what would be considered almost some type of miraculous pace, which is like kind of an allegory for the way that capitalism has spread across the globe and
Hmm.
used technological advancements like the telegraph, um, you know, steam engines, and then moving to electricity,
Hmm.
combustion engines, all of that sort of stuff, which now traverses the world and spreads capitalism everywhere. He's able to do all of these things globally, which is also allegory for globalization. And he then spreads it and distributes that wealth as he sees fit across the world, and then does it all again the next year, so on and so forth. So it's like it's exactly the industrial capitalist story right there in a nutshell. If you take away all of the glitz and glamour and all of the wonder away from it, and like just bring it right back to its bare bones. That's
Hmm.
basically what's happening. Fat dude in charge of a bunch of slaves, I guess, that work for
Hmm.
him because they're not wage laborers, I'm assuming, because they don't get paid anything. Like you
Yeah.
mentioned before, potentially milk and cookies, but we're not sure. Um, and then he kind of exploits a bunch of reindeer who know how to fly, which is a technological, let's just say it's an allegory for a technological achievement of some sort, which allows them to basically encircle the globe in
Mm,
record speeds, unbeknownst to man, defying the laws of physics, all that sort of stuff.
mm.
And he reaps basically all the glory for it.
Yeah, look, I guess since we're going down this Marxist interpretation, like let's do it for the laughs. The first thing I would question is if he is like obviously he's gaining all of the value, I guess, from the praise and the altruism. Like,
Mm,
sure, that's fine, but it also does open the door of does he also claim all of the value from all of the magic? Because obviously he's lending some of the magic to the reindeers because he
mm,
obviously needs them. Uh, uh, needs them to do their job in order to give the
yeah.
presents to all of the all of the kids. But also, does he lend magic to for the elves to do what they need to do in order to work in
Mm,
the do their work in the workshop, Santa's workshop. So it's almost as if he has two monopolies. He not only has monopoly of all of the value within the workshop, but also all of the magic value that's in the
mm,
workshop.
yeah.
Um, and the only other comment I would make is that just when you were describing, like, oh, he has a workshop that's in the middle of the North Pole, the middle of nowhere, so like almost these elves and everyone that's working in his workshop are like isolated in another part of the world, so nobody can get to them basically.
Yeah.
It's almost as if like it's a sleeper neoliberalism story.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like when you think about it in that sort of, I guess, cynical framing, it's a bit surprising it took until the 1970s for people to be like, oh well, in terms of manufacturing jobs and like shipping them off to different countries,
Mm.
I'm surprised it didn't happen sooner.
Well, like early capitalism was all about that. Like you've read
Mm,
um Das Kapital Volume 1. Like Marx talks a lot about primitive accumulation, right?
mm,
And so there was a lot of slave labor and horrendous kind of working conditions that colonialists put on um, native populations that were
yeah.
far offshore from mainland and stuff like that, and like exploited lots and lots of working people around the world. They might not have been working people in the sense of wage laborers, but they were exploited nonetheless. So like capitalism has always kind of targeted groups of people offshore from where like the main culture is that's doing all the exploitation, to kind of use them to whatever means necessary to get whatever capital injections that they need to make their system work. So neoliberalism isn't new in that sense. I think neoliberalism revived that part of the capitalist system
Mm,
that was lost to the most advanced industrial nations after like World War II and stuff like that, because
mm,
they were relying mostly on nationalized and homegrown labor forces, and they were like, "Why are we doing this? We know we can, offshore this stuff and exploit people better overseas." And so, like, I think, yeah, having factory workers working under conditions like all year long, pumping out toys for somebody else's benefit, like in an isolated area, like you were talking about geographically, and like isolated in more than that, like it's one of the most remote places of the planet, and it's
mm,
like its weather conditions wouldn't allow people to kind of just, happen chance and come by it. It's completely isolated for lots of reasons,
mm,
because of its physical constraints as well. Um, like that sort of stuff is just part of capitalism. The early stages, the later stages that we're living in now,
mm.
um, exploiting people offshore and far away is just part of the machine.
Yeah, and I've just found I just find this discourse you ultimately have to talk about the other major I guess, well, you wouldn't say parable, but at least Christmas story and showing it as in juxtaposition, because like obviously I do you all of the union memes are coming out right now, the ones that are concerning A Christmas Carol, and the ideas of like, oh hey, join your union because your boss isn't going to be visited by three ghosts to make him a nicer person. Like
Yeah,
if you
yeah,
want to
yeah,
get your proper value, join your union so they can fight to get you a better wage.
yeah,
And
yeah,
like and that's the whole thing of like contrasting the Santa story in comparison to Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, is that he's visited from the ghost of his past, present, and future, and he literally has to be scared into um, not continuing his money lendering ways, but to be more of a giving person and to see people as people,
yeah.
and then get involved in the Christmas spirit.
Mm, mm.
And that's obviously completely contrasted to I guess the consumerist Santa story of well, buy 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 to give give give.
Yeah. See, that's an interesting kind of juxtaposition here because A Christmas Carol, which is what you're talking about, that
Mm,
is a story within a capitalist setting, right?
mm,
So like it's very much conscious. That tale is conscious of the woes of capitalist society and is critiquing it openly, right?
yeah.
Is really a discourse on the problems with industrial capitalist society and like how you would build some form of redemption story into that. And to separate oneself from kind of the dog eat dog world style that the market system has brought upon mankind. Even in like, the most festive and like joyful part of the year, you still have people out there like your Scrooges who are just cutthroat, ruthless bastards who will just like
Mm,
devour their neighbors for a quick buck. And so
mm,
that's a critique on that. And it's like the perfect redemption story because even he can be um, salvaged. He can find salvation at the end of the day, as long as he repents for his sins and changes his ways. So it's like that's a nice, like, kind of capitalist story for people that have a conscience and are morally obliged to do more than just feed into the capitalist system. But it's conscious of itself. It's conscious of the capitalist story. Where Santa, like what I'm saying before, the Santa story is different, I would say. It's an echo of the economic like the economic basis of this society.
yeah.
We need tales, we need culture that reinforces the predominant economic mode that we're living
Mm,
in. And this one reinforces that economic mode every day of the week. I could tell you that, like, you know, not everyone has heard of A Christmas Carol. And I can tell you, everyone out there, the world over, doesn't matter what culture you are, has heard of Santa Claus.
yes.
Everyone.
Yes, but I would say in terms of A Christmas Carol, I would take it further. Like, don't get me wrong, I yeah, obviously we don't know the day after the big finale in A Christmas Carol,
Mm.
but the whole point of the final day and I guess the finale is that he obviously wakes up. He realizes that the final ghost hasn't really killed him. He's obviously gone to Bob Cratchit's house, and he forgives everyone's debts because that's the thing. He's a usurer. He's a money lender.
Yep,
So
yep.
he does incredibly good. And the funny thing is that his lesson throughout all of this is that, well, instead of being a Scrooge, instead of you know, installing all of that massive interest onto everyone during the Christmas period and basically screwing everyone over, he forgives everyone debts and he kind of stops being a capitalist.
Mm.
He, like, don't get me wrong, like, the day afterwards, he could have been like, oh, okay, well, hey, guys, like, I've just forgiven the debts, and I'm going to go back to being a capitalist, and maybe I'm not going to be so harsh. Maybe I do an interest rate that's a lot more reasonable and not screw you over as much. But
Mm,
at least with what we're given in the Charles Dickens book, the end story is almost a very Jesus-like end to the tale. It's like, well, in order to be a good person, you have to give away everything you own, or at least give away everything you are in order to be a good person.
mm,
So like him like dropping all the debts and at least giving to the town as well as giving to Bob Cratchit and his family and to
mm,
Tiny Tim. Like that's the tale that you're ending with, and
mm,
like it's almost as if you have to go against the grain of industrial capitalism in order to be a good person. Like
mm.
that's what
And
I
that's
take,
and
and
that
that, and
is that's a
yeah,
critique of capitalism. It's
yeah,
a story from within the capitalist mode,
mm,
reflecting on it, critiquing it, and offering that salvation, that redemption
mm,
story. That's what I was talking about. It's
yeah,
an anti-capitalist story. Santa
yeah,
is not. That's the juxtaposition I was talking about before. While that is a critique and then offering some type of, um, I guess, moral guidance for people out there
mm,
that are living through the capitalist mode, Santa is not. Santa is the cultural, um, the cultural culmination of living in a capitalist society.
mm,
And like the whole year, people are looking towards this one moment which kind of eclipses any other moment, I would say, on the calendar, even New Year's. It eclipses any other day, like national days, public holidays, whatever it is. Christmas, I would say, is almost the center of the calendar
mm,
for most people out there. And this is not even like for religious purpose. I'm just talking about for the fact that it encapsulates perfectly our ideological standpoint in the world right now as a species,
mm,
as the human race, because we are in the capitalist mode and we celebrate capitalism unconsciously, and we do that
mm,
through Santa Claus and his story, which is like the coming together of consumerism and this weird this weird kind of, you put it there, this weird melding together of consumerism with altruism.
mm,
And like what you're saying before, like the consumerism and all of the dirty underbelly of the capitalist machine and this capitalist kind of will and drive to force us to consume and be part of the economy is all kind of washed over nicely with this altruistic fairy tale, which
mm,
has its derivations in the story of a man apparently from Greece, 1600 years ago, that
mm,
was apparently very generous and was celebrated because and was then celebrated by the gift giving to children. And so like that
mm.
has carried over, and that has been, the premise for why we celebrate this. But really, underneath all of that, it's just a perfect tale for the capitalist mode of production. It lends
No,
itself
yeah.
perfectly.
No, but I think you described it very well there. Is that when you were saying that the Santa story is altruism is consumerism, whereas the Christmas Carol is anti-capitalism is altruism.
Yeah, yeah, they're juxtaposed in that way, and they
Yeah.
seem very strong. You can see their contrast there. Like one really, like, you've got somebody that you think is completely corrupted and beyond saving, and then you
Mm,
have Santa, which is like kind of, he's almost like he's Jesus now. In an anti-religious or a secular world, Santa he's like this perfect, untouchable, moralistic figure. He judges everyone, whether they're naughty or nice, kids especially, and he's the judge, jury, and executioner, and he gets
actually,
to
yeah.
stand there and basically shower people with gifts if they're good.
Yeah. Actually, no. That's a good way of describing it, because isn't that the whole thing? That if you're nice, you'll get a present, but if you are naughty, you'll get a lump of
You get
coal.
a lump of coal. And like the
Yes.
funny thing is, like coal is very precious, right? Like
Mm,
like out of all the things, like you could have said, "I'll give you a potato," or like I don't know, like a bag of rocks. Like why isn't it firewood? Firewood was the fuel of all of the ages right up until industrial capitalism. Why
mm.
isn't it like a stick of uranium? Because
Yeah.
coal is the symbol of industrial capitalism.
Yes. Uh, yeah. Like, I guess maybe that's kind of like a relic of its time, but it's a bit of an odd choice to make.
No, but it's perfect though because like even if you're bad, you get at least the bare minimum fuel necessary for capitalist society, coal.
Mm.
So you can either get something wonderful and something that you'll treasure because it's part of the lovely consumerist side of things, or you get the bare minimum fuel that's required to sustain your society. Coal. It's not
No, I
attractive, but it's not that bad. And like as much as we like to think we're sophisticated nowadays, and like we've got all of this wonderful technology around us, there are still a lot of countries that rely heavily on coal. Not much has
yes.
changed in that regard.
Well, yes. Just because I guess, first world countries might be focusing on renewable energies.
Yeah,
That does,
focusing on it, but there's a lot of first world countries out there that are still very reliant on coal.
yes, and well, I guess we're slightly getting off topic, but like, yeah, I would say probably COVID didn't help in the transition, because I think a lot of people had to go back to using coal fire power
Yeah,
stations.
yeah, yeah,
But yeah, okay, I could see what you mean, is that um, if you're a good girl or boy, you'll get what you want. You'll get what you want in terms of your present. But if you're naughty, we'll give you the bare minimum for you to feed the fire and feed the nation to move forward.
mm.
Yeah, I could see where you're going with that.
But like, why coal? You know, it could be anything. It could be nothing. You get nothing. But like, no, you get fuel. The thing that fuels the industrial capitalist system.
And like,
It's very interesting.
yeah, you get the bare minimum for your family to keep warm at night.
Yeah, it's incredible. And so like the Santa story, and that's why like I thought it would be very interesting to do a Christmas special. It's just perfect when it comes to analyzing capitalism. Now, what is the revolutionary lesson from the Santa story? That that is the $1 million question. And we touched on this briefly before, or you touched on it briefly before when you were describing, what's going on with the whole elf situation. Like, do they get paid in milk and cookies? Santa kind of they make all the value, and Santa kind of takes on all the glory. Like, what's the alternative to the Santa story then? So, like, let's just say we had some type of socialist revolution or communist revolution tomorrow. Would the Santa story still exist?
I think the lesson or the revolutionary lesson you can take from that story is, well, that not much has changed in terms of, uh, I guess, capitalist culture of wanting to highlight the leader or the capitalist in an organization.
Yeah,
So yeah, even though the elves and the reindeer and all the necessary people are the ones that are creating the value, it's Santa and the capitalist that um, uh, is the one that's reaping the benefits.
yeah.
There's no different as an idol, Santa being who he is, compared to your Elon Musk and your Mark Zuckerbergs of today.
Yeah, they're completely
So
celebrated like they're the only people they put like that made. their organizations possible.
Yeah, so when Jeff Bezos says like, "Oh, it's my money that's doing this entire space program that I've got," well, it's like,
Yeah,
yeah, but you're not necessarily talking about all of the scientists and
yeah,
everyone else that's working quite hard
yeah,
to
yeah,
to create your
yeah.
your Mars paradise that you
Yeah,
wanna
yeah,
get. So
yeah.
I guess maybe the revolutionary's tale to come out of this is, well, should in the Santa story, should you be asking about the elves' rights, the reindeer's rights, and therefore,
Mm,
what is your value in society?
yeah.
What value do you create in society, and how do you fight to
Mm.
gain that value in society?
So, like, let me just get this straight. If I can just really hone in on what you're saying there for us. In order to be true revolutionaries, we need to kill Santa.
Look, I
Like, I don't
wouldn't
want to put words
say.
in your mouth, but it's pretty much sounded like we're going to try and kill Santa. So,
Look, I'm not advocating to getting the guillotine out. Like, don't get me wrong, I am reading the French Revolutions at this moment, but
but
it
it wouldn't hurt.
wouldn't hurt to be recognized, like the elves and the reindeer to be recognized. And if he tells them to go get stuffed, then maybe you should seize the means of production.
Sees the means of
But
production. So, the revolutionary version of the Santa story is one where the the elves, with assistance from the reindeer, take over the workshop, collectivize,
yes,
and start distributing the fruits of their labor to the children of the world collectively, as opposed to letting it all go through one person. And so, like, the
well,
elves become these magical beings that traverse the world once a year and hand out the toys that they create together, and they share all of the glory. That's the revolutionary tale.
yes. So really, it shouldn't be Christmas. It should be Elfmas.
It should be Elfmas. Yes. Yeah, that would be the icing on the cake. We got to etch Santa out of the story and change the word to Elfmas. And people like getting behind that because I see a lot of this elf on the shelf stuff around.
Yes.
People do like to unknowingly celebrate the elves. Maybe that's the undercurrent of the socialist change that is coming for us. People are starting to recognize the true heroes of Christmas.
You know what? Maybe we can make that a tradition on this channel. That whenever we have a episode that's around this time, instead
Yeah.
of saying "Merry Christmas," we say "Merry
Merry
Elfmas."
Elfmas, yeah, and I'm thinking of a new logo potentially, like a guillotined Santa, or like a whole bunch of like elves sitting around a table, and they take there's like the centerpiece on the table, and they reveal the dish, and it's like cooked Santa, and they're instead of eating the rich, they're eating Santa or something like that.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
but like I guess what you're trying to say is that the logo might be "Eat the Rich," but
yeah,
it's
yeah,
Santa
and
plate.
there's Santa on a plate. Yeah, and the elves are
But
carving up the Christmas Santa.
and like one of the bubbles is "Merry Elfmas."
Yeah. Vive la révolution. Very Elfmas.
Okay, and with that, we might have been having some Elfmas fun here, but we have this week's Synthwave Art. And the prompt for this one was the Santa story and consumerism. As you can probably see, I think it's very interesting that I'm pretty confident that is the Coca-Cola Santa from like years ago. I'm pretty confident it's that same one, if
Yeah,
not like something that's very similar.
yeah, yeah,
From like I don't know, maybe like 10 years ago. I remember there was like a Christmas Santa that like Coca-Cola did, and it was very similar design to that
yeah,
one.
right.
And
What's the
then
thing behind him?
is it like a tape recorder? I
Yeah,
don't know what's going on there.
yeah, right.
And then he obviously has like a gift bag in his hand, and then there's like a teller machine, um,
Yeah,
and then
right.
like yeah, and then other gift bags.
Yeah,
So,
right.
and then like what was it, 10-foot Christmas trees behind him.
Yeah, yeah,
So
right. Right.
Uh,
Good old retro
yeah,
Santa.
yeah, it's got a lot going on there, and a lot of
Mm.
consumer stuff, but also Big Brother re- recorder.
Yeah,
Like,
it's
wait,
strange.
wait, do you reckon that's like an on the nose, your phone's listening to you thing, and like it's
Why not?
suggesting consumerist stuff? Like, we're
Yeah,
getting into surveillance capitalism
yeah,
here,
yeah,
but
yeah,
like,
yeah,
but
massively.
like, yeah, like your like Siri and all of that's
Mm.
like listening to you and it's
Yeah,
suggesting to you Christmas gifts.
yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. Why not? Let's go with that for IS. Let's go with that.
okay. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, Merry Elfmas, and remember to keep thinking and keep learning. And I'll give it to you, to Mystery, to sign off.
Thank you very much for IS. Merry Elfmas to you, sir, and to all of you out there. Please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery.